Did you know that in the summer of 1939, Europe felt like a group of people at a dinner party, all trying very hard to ignore the fact that a tiger had just walked into the room and was currently sniffing the silverware? Everyone just kept passing the salt. Before you get too comfortable, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel to encourage me to make more content like this. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights and let's begin tonight's journey. You can feel it in the air, a strange, heavy stillness that has settled over the final days of August. The heat is oppressive, sticking the back of your shirt to the chair as you sit by the window, listening to the radio. The sun hangs low in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows that crawl across the cobblestone streets. Children are still playing outside, their laughter a fragile, defiant sound against the backdrop of the announcer's somber voice. The world is holding its breath, and you can feel the pressure in your own chest. It's a collective anxiety, a quiet hum of unease that thrums just beneath the surface of everyday life. You try to push it away, to focus on the familiar comfort of your home, the smell of dinner cooking, the gentle tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. But the feeling persists. It's a form of cognitive dissonance on a continental scale. Everyone wants to believe in peace. They want to believe the promises, the treaties, the handshakes captured in grainy newsreels. They want to believe that the last war, the one that was supposed to end all wars, was truly the last. Yet the headlines tell a different story. The radio crackles with news of ultimatums and troop movements. And then, the most jarring news of all arrives, a diplomatic bombshell that shatters any lingering illusions. Germany and the Soviet Union, two sworn enemies, two ideologies that despise each other, have signed a non-aggression pact. It makes no sense. It's like watching a wolf and a bear suddenly decide to share a picnic basket. You know, deep down, that they aren't just planning to share sandwiches. They're planning to carve up the whole forest, and you live right in the middle of it. This is the psychological state of a world on the brink. You see people trying to maintain normalcy with a desperate intensity. In Poland, some citizens are lining up to donate their wedding rings, their family heirlooms, anything of value to a national defense fund, believing their fierce patriotism can forge a shield strong enough to protect their homeland. It's a beautiful and heartbreaking gesture of defiance. Meanwhile, in London and Paris, politicians are still hoping for a diplomatic solution. Historians still debate whether this policy of appeasement was a genuine, if naive, attempt to prevent another catastrophic war, or if it was a cynical ploy to buy just a little more time to rearm. Did they truly believe that Tiger could be reasoned with, or were they just hoping it would eat someone else first? As you look out the window, a cool breeze finally stirs the heavy air, a temporary relief, but it feels less like a comfort and more like a final, gentle sigh before the storm. The calendar on the wall reads August 31st. The world is about to change forever. The radio, once a source of anxious speculation, now crackles with the stark, unbelievable truth. It is the morning of September 1st. The stillness of the night has been broken not by the dawn chorus, but by the drone of engines and the distant thunder of explosions. Poland has been invaded. The dinner party is over, and the tiger has begun its meal. You try to picture it, this new kind of war you've been hearing whispers about, Blitzkrieg, lightning war. It's a terrifyingly modern concept, a brutal symphony of coordinated violence. Imagine not the slow, muddy crawl of trenches you heard stories about from the last war, but a sudden, overwhelming storm. First come the planes, the Stuka dive bombers, with sirens fixed to their landing gear. They call them Jericho trumpets, a deliberate psychological tool designed to sound like the scream of a bird of prey as it descends, creating pure, paralyzing terror on the ground below. Then, before the dust from the bombs has even settled, come the tanks. Hundreds of them, not spread out in support of infantry, but concentrated into armored spearheads, punching through defensive lines like a steel fist through paper. They don't stop to fight, they just keep moving, deep into enemy territory, severing supply lines, cutting off communication, creating chaos and confusion. The infantry follows behind, mopping up the pockets of resistance left isolated and bewildered in the wake of the armored assault. Within weeks, Poland, a proud and brave nation, is crushed between the German hammer from the west and the Soviet anvil from the east. The illusion of a strong, modern defense, the illusion that alliances would provide immediate protection, is shattered into a million pieces. After the fall of Poland, a strange and unsettling quiet descends upon Europe. They call it the phony war, or the Blitzkrieg, the sitting war. For months, the great armies of France and Britain face the German forces across a fortified border, but very little happens. It's an unnerving period of waiting, a collective breath held for so long it makes your lungs ache. Soldiers play football in the fields between the front lines, and you almost allow yourself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst is over. This quiet, however, is just the tightening of a spring. In the spring of 1940, it uncoils with breathtaking speed and violence. The German war machine turns west. Denmark and Norway fall. Then, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. The main assault, however, is aimed at France. The French have put their faith in the Maginot Line, a massive, technologically advanced chain of fortifications stretching along their border with Germany. It's a monumental feat of engineering and a perfect symbol of a defensive mindset, a nation psychologically preparing to fight the last war all over again. But the Germans don't bother attacking it. They simply go around it, through the supposedly impassable Ardennes forest. The shock is profound. It's like building the most secure front door in the world, only to watch the intruder climb in through an open window upstairs. The French and British armies are outmaneuvered, their strategies rendered obsolete overnight. The fall of France in just 6 weeks sends a tremor of fear across the entire world. Paris, the city of light, the symbol of Western culture and freedom, is occupied. You see the newsreels, the black and white images of German soldiers marching past the Arc de Triomphe, and it feels fundamentally wrong, a violation of the natural order. Historians still debate whether the French collapse was primarily a military failure of outdated tactics and poor communication, or if it was the result of a deeper crisis of political division and a national morale, already weakened by the trauma of the First World War. Either way, the illusion of safety is gone for good. Europe is now staring into the abyss. With France fallen, you now stand on the shores of a small island, looking out across a narrow channel of grey, choppy water. Suddenly, the whole world feels much smaller. Europe, which just a year ago was a continent of sovereign nations, is now a dark, monolithic fortress under a single, terrifying flag. And you are on the last piece of free land, a lonely outpost against the storm. The feeling is one of profound isolation. A popular song of the time, "We're going to hang out the washing on the Siegfried Line," which once sounded so jaunty and confident, now seems like a relic from another lifetime. The joke isn't funny anymore. Hitler is so confident of his victory that he is already planning the victory parade through London. All that stands in his way is the English Channel and the sky above it. The German plan, codenamed Operation Sea Lion, is straightforward. To launch an invasion across the Channel, they first need to control the air. They must destroy the Royal Air Force, both in the sky and on the ground. And so begins the Battle of Britain. Every day, the blue summer skies of 1940 become a vast, chaotic battlefield. You tilt your head back and watch the contrails of fighter planes weave intricate, deadly patterns high above, like chalk lines on a celestial blackboard. The faint, distant rattle of machine gun fire becomes the soundtrack to your afternoon tea. The pilots of the RAF, young men from Britain, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Canada, and all corners of the Commonwealth, become the nation's saviors. They are, as Prime Minister Winston Churchill will later call them, the few. Then, the war comes down from the sky and into your home. The Blitz begins. The Germans, frustrated by their failure to destroy the RAF, switch their tactics to bombing cities, especially London. The goal is no longer just military, it's psychological, to break your spirit, to terrorize you into submission. The nightly wail of the air raid siren becomes a familiar, gut-wrenching sound. You learn the routine, the hurried scramble into the cold, damp Anderson shelter in your garden, or the communal journey to the nearest underground station, where thousands of people sleep on the platforms, a strange subterranean community forged in fear and defiance. The nights are filled with the crump of distant explosions, the shudder of the ground beneath you, the acrid smell of smoke and burning rubble that hangs in the air for weeks. But something unexpected happens. The shared ordeal doesn't break the spirit of the people, it hardens it. There is a strange sense of community, of everyone being in it together. An eccentric curiosity of the time was the creation of the siren suit, an all-in-one garment, like an adult onesie, that could be zipped on quickly over pajamas for a midnight dash to the shelter. It's a small, very British, and slightly absurd example of adapting to the unthinkable. This resilience is bolstered by a secret weapon, a technological marvel that gives the RAF a critical edge. It's called radio direction finding, but you know it by its simpler name, radar. A chain of stations along the coast acts as a kind of electronic eye, peering out into the darkness, able to detect incoming German bomber formations while they are still far out over the channel. This early warning system allows the outnumbered RAF to scramble their Spitfires and Hurricanes to exactly the right place at the right time, conserving precious fuel and pilots. Historians still debate whether Hitler's decision to shift from bombing RAF airfields to bombing cities was the single greatest mistake that cost him the battle, as it gave the beleaguered Air Force a crucial breathing space to repair and regroup. The fortress holds. The roar of defiance is heard across the world, a signal that the war is far from over. After the defiant roar from the small island fortress, the world waits to see what the Tiger will do next. For nearly a year, an uneasy peace holds between Germany and the Soviet Union. You recall that strange picnic between the wolf and the bear, the non-aggression pact that carved up Poland. It was a partnership of pure, cynical convenience, and everyone knew it couldn't last. The two ideologies were fundamentally opposed, like fire and ice. It was only a matter of which would try to extinguish the other first. In the early hours of June 22, 1941, you get your answer. Without a declaration of war, without any warning, the pact is broken in the most spectacular and violent way imaginable. Operation Barbarossa is launched. It is, to this day, the largest land invasion in human history. Over 3 million German soldiers, along with allies from other Axis nations, surge across a front that stretches from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. It is a tidal wave of men, tanks, and artillery, aimed directly at the heart of the Soviet Union. For Hitler, this is the real war, the one he had always intended to fight. It's a gamble of epic proportions, driven by a toxic mix of overconfidence from his swift victory in France and a deep-seated ideological hatred. He believed the Soviet Union was a rotten structure that would collapse with a single, decisive kick. He envisioned a war that would be over before the winter snows began to fall. The psychological shock on the Soviet side is total. Stalin, the absolute dictator, the man of steel, is paralyzed by a state of profound denial. As reports of the massive invasion pour in, he initially refuses to believe them, convinced they are provocations orchestrated by his own generals or by the British, designed to trick him into a war with Germany. For crucial hours, the Soviet military is left without clear orders, its air force caught on the ground and annihilated in the first few days. This catastrophic failure of leadership leaves the frontline soldiers in a state of utter confusion and terror. Historians still debate the true nature of Stalin's surprise. Was he genuinely duped by Hitler, a fatal misreading of his rival's intentions? Or was he aware of the impending threat but playing for time, and was simply caught off guard by the exact timing and scale of the attack? On the ground, it is chaos. The Blitzkrieg tactics that overwhelmed France are unleashed on the vast, open plains of Russia. German panzer divisions race forward, covering astonishing distances each day, encircling entire Soviet armies. taking hundreds of thousands of prisoners in massive pockets. The Soviet soldiers, though fighting with desperate bravery in many places, are hobbled by poor leadership, outdated equipment, and a rigid command structure that stifles initiative. An obscure but telling detail reveals the depth of German hubris. The invading soldiers were equipped only with summer uniforms. The plan was so confident of a quick victory that the quartermasters arranged for winter clothing to be delivered later. Once the troops had reached their final destination, Moscow, it was a logistical decision that would come back to haunt them with brutal, freezing consequences. As the summer sun beats down on the endless fields of wheat and the choking dust of the Russian steppe, the German war machine seems unstoppable. A new front has opened, one so vast and savage it will ultimately consume more lives than all other fronts of the war combined. While the frozen plains of Russia are consuming millions, you find yourself half a world away, under a warm and gentle sun. The date is December 7th, 1941. The world, for you, has shrunk to the size of this beautiful island, a tropical paradise in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The air is soft and humid, carrying the sweet scent of plumeria and the salty tang of the sea. It is a Sunday morning at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The news from Europe, of Blitzkrieg and the siege of Moscow, feels like a story from another planet, a grim fairy tale read from a great distance. America is not at war. There is a powerful feeling of safety, of being insulated by two vast oceans from the troubles of the old world. You are a sleeping giant, and your dreams are peaceful. But across that vast, deceptively calm ocean, another power has been making its own calculations. The Empire of Japan, determined to expand its dominion across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, sees the United States as the only obstacle in its path, and so they have made an immense, audacious gamble. For days, a powerful Japanese naval fleet, including 6 aircraft carriers, has been steaming across the Pacific in secret, a ghost fleet, maintaining absolute radio silence, hidden by weather fronts and sheer distance. Their target is the heart of American naval power in the Pacific, the fleet of battleships moored peacefully in the harbor. The Japanese strategists believe that a single, devastating knockout blow can cripple the American will to fight, giving them the time they need to fortify their new empire and make it impregnable. The first wave of planes appears just before 8 a.m. at first. You might mistake them for your own. A training exercise, perhaps. The sound is a low drone that grows steadily into a roar. But then you see the red circles on the wings, the rising sun of Japan, and then the world dissolves into chaos. Torpedoes slice through the placid harbor waters, bombs rain down from the sky. The peaceful Sunday morning is shattered by the deafening scream of diving aircraft and the thunderous retort of explosions. Black smoke billows into the pristine blue sky, thick and greasy, obscuring the sun. The USS Arizona, a mighty battleship, is hit by an armor-piercing bomb that penetrates its forward magazine. It erupts in a cataclysmic explosion, lifting the massive warship out of the water before it breaks apart and sinks in minutes, entombing over 1,000 of its crew. An eccentric and often overlooked part of the attack were the secret weapons deployed alongside the aircraft. What you don't see amidst the aerial chaos are the 5 two-man midget submarines, launched to sneak into the harbor and fire their own torpedoes. It was a high-tech, high-risk component of the plan, but all 5 were either sunk or captured, failing to inflict any significant damage. The attack was a stunning tactical success for the Japanese, but a catastrophic strategic failure. Historians still debate the extent of American foreknowledge, questioning whether intelligence failures were the result of simple incompetence or a more complex political calculus, but the outcome on the ground was one of total surprise. The attack did not break the American spirit. It forged it into a single, unified fist of incandescent rage. The isolationist debate that had divided the country for years vanished overnight. The sleeping giant was not crippled. It was awakened, and it was filled with a terrible resolve. The peaceful dream is over. Now, you are in the war, all of you. From the warm, sunlit waters of the Pacific, your journey takes you back to the heart of the conflict, to the vast, snow-covered plains of the East. The German war machine that seemed so invincible during the summer of 1941 has ground to a halt just before the gates of Moscow, stopped by a combination of stiffening Soviet resistance and a far more formidable enemy, the Russian winter. Now, in the late summer of 1942, the offensive has been renewed, but with a different objective. The focus is south, towards the rich oil fields of the Caucasus, and standing in the way is a city on the Volga River, a city that bears the name of the Soviet leader himself, Stalingrad. You are now in a city that has ceased to be a city. It is a skeletal ruin, a vast, sprawling landscape of rubble and shattered buildings cloaked in shrouds of smoke. The German Sixth Army has pushed deep into the urban center, and what follows is a new kind of hell, a form of warfare so intimate and savage it has its own name, Rettenkrieg, Rat War. This isn't a battle of grand maneuvers across open fields. The front line is not a line on a map. It is a fluid, ever-shifting concept. The front line could be the thickness of a single wall, with you on one side and the enemy on the other. It's a war fought for individual rooms, for stairwells, for sewer tunnels and factory floors. Life expectancy for a new soldier on the front line is measured not in weeks or days, but in hours. The cold is a physical enemy. It seeps into your bones, relentless and unforgiving. The temperature plummets to levels the German soldiers, in their still inadequate winter gear, were never prepared for. Frostbite claims as many casualties as bullets. Food is scarce, reduced to thin soup and scraps of horse meat. The psychological toll is immense. The constant, grinding fear is amplified by the claustrophobia of the ruins and the ever-present threat of a sniper's bullet. You learn to move differently, to see the world not as a collection of streets and buildings, but as a three-dimensional chessboard of death, where an open window is a kill zone and a pile of rubble could hide a machine gun nest. In the midst of this chaos, a single apartment building becomes a symbol of the entire battle. It is known as Pavlov's house, named after the sergeant who led a tiny platoon to capture and hold it. For 2 months, a handful of Soviet soldiers turned this ordinary building into an impregnable fortress, holding out against daily German assaults. They surrounded it with minefields, knocked holes in the walls to create firing positions, and even dug a communications trench back to their own lines. It's an obscure but powerful testament to the psychology of defense, where a small piece of home, even a ruined one, becomes a cause worth dying for. Then, the tide turns. In November 1942, the Soviets launch a massive counter-offensive codenamed Operation Uranus. They don't attack the city itself. They strike at the weaker Romanian and Italian armies protecting the German flanks. And in a matter of days, the hunters become the hunted. The entire German Sixth Army, nearly 250,000 men, is trapped, encircled in the frozen ruins of the city they had all but conquered. Historians still debate whether Hitler's fanatical refusal to allow the Sixth Army to attempt a breakout was a purely military blunder born of hubris, or if it was a cold, calculated decision to sacrifice the army for a propaganda narrative of heroic martyrdom. The frozen hell of Stalingrad has become a tomb, and it marks the beginning of the end for the Third Reich on the Eastern Front. You leave the frozen, blood-soaked rubble of Stalingrad behind, and in the blink of an eye, you are transported back to the other side of the world. The air is warm again, thick with the humidity of the tropics, but the sweet scent of flowers is gone, replaced by the sharp, metallic smell of fuel oil and salt spray. You are standing on the pitching deck of an aircraft carrier, a tiny, man-made island of steel in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's been 6 months since the attack on Pearl Harbor, and the news from this theater of war has been a relentless drumbeat of defeat. Japan's naval power seems overwhelming, its veteran pilots and superior Zero fighters unstoppable. They have swept across the Pacific and Southeast Asia, and now they are planning their next move, the one they believe will be the final, decisive blow. The vastness of the ocean around you is absolute. It is a featureless blue desert in every direction, a humbling and isolating sight. The only thing that breaks the monotony is the white foam of the ship's wake, a temporary scar on an endless surface. Below decks, however, in a windowless basement room back in Hawaii, a different kind of war is being fought. It's a war of whispers and intellect, of deciphering patterns in the static of radio transmissions. You are part of that secret world now. You lean over a desk cluttered with papers, your ears aching from the pressure of headphones, listening to the Morse code chatter of the Japanese Navy. Most of it is indecipherable, a complex code known as JN25. But your team, a brilliant and eccentric group of cryptanalysts, has begun to find the cracks. They have pieced together enough fragments to know that a massive Japanese fleet is on the move, planning an attack on a target designated only by the code letters AF. The commanders in Washington believe it's a feint, that the real target is the west coast of America. But your team leader, a maverick officer named Joseph Rochefort, is convinced AF is a tiny but vital American base on a remote atoll Midway. To prove it, he devises an ingenious low-tech trick in a high-tech war. He arranges for the garrison at Midway to send out a fake, unencrypted radio message, complaining that their freshwater distillation plant has broken down. A few days later, you and your team intercept a Japanese coded message. It reads, AF is short on fresh water. The trap has been sprung. The American Navy now knows exactly where the blow will fall. This intelligence allows the outnumbered American fleet to set an ambush. They wait, hidden beyond the horizon, for the Japanese fleet to arrive. The battle, when it comes on June 4, 1942, is a chaotic affair of scouting planes, high-stakes guesswork, and sheer dumb luck. The first American torpedo bomber attacks are a disaster. Their slow, outdated planes shot out of the sky without scoring a single hit. But their sacrifice pulls the Japanese fighter cover down to sea level. And at that exact moment, as the Japanese carriers are frantically rearming their planes on deck, their decks littered with fuel lines and high-explosive bombs, a squadron of American dive bombers appears, high above, almost directly overhead, completely unopposed. In the space of 5 minutes, the tide of the entire Pacific War turns. 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers that attacked Pearl Harbor are hit, turning into colossal, blazing torches. A 4th is crippled and sunk later that day. Historians still debate whether the American victory was a direct result of superior intelligence and codebreaking, or if it was a cascade of Japanese strategic blunders and a healthy dose of incredible luck. Whichever it was, the miracle at Midway has happened. The unstoppable force has been stopped, and the long, bloody road to Tokyo has just been opened. The vast open horizon of the Pacific Ocean dissolves, and you find yourself enclosed, claustrophobic. You walk down a familiar street in a city that is no longer your own. The architecture is the same. The cobblestones beneath your feet are the ones you've known your whole life. But the atmosphere is poisoned. Grey uniforms are a common sight, their presence a constant, low-grade hum of oppression. The red, white and black of the swastika hangs from buildings, a stark, geometric wound against the familiar facades. It feels like a stain on the sky. Life under occupation is a masterclass in psychological adaptation. You learn to live a double life, even if you're not actively involved in anything. You have your public face, impassive, compliant, careful, and you have your private thoughts, the ones you only dare to share in a whisper with those you trust completely. Every day presents a series of small, agonizing choices. Do you avert your eyes when a patrol passes, or do you meet their gaze with a flicker of defiance? Do you serve the occupying soldiers in your shop with cold, formal politeness, or do you feign a smile? Most people choose simple survival, a quiet, head-down endurance. But for some, the psychological weight of submission is too heavy to bear. The need to do something, anything, to push back against the tide becomes an undeniable imperative. This is the birth of the resistance. It doesn't begin with explosions and ambushes. It begins with a whisper, a secret newspaper, printed in a damp basement on a hand-cranked press, the smell of ink and defiance mingling in the air. These small, smudged pages, passed from hand to hand, hidden in the bottom of a grocery basket, are more than just news. They are a lifeline, a psychological weapon against the smothering blanket of official propaganda, a reminder that you are not alone in your anger. The tactics of this shadow war are born of desperation and ingenuity. You learn to use the everyday world as a cloak. A piece of chalk as a tool for scrawling a V for victory on a wall in the dead of night. A loose bolt on a railway track can delay a train carrying supplies to the front. The most potent weapon is information. The French resistance, known as the Maquis, became the eyes and ears of the Allies, mapping out German defensive positions and troop movements in Normandy. Intelligence that would prove invaluable on D-Day. The work is terrifyingly dangerous. Every knock on the door could be the secret police. Every friendly neighbor could be an informer. An incredibly obscure but ingenious method of communication was developed by the Belgian resistance. Women in knitting circles would sit in public, seemingly gossiping, but the patterns they were knitting, a combination of dropped stitches and pearls, were actually coded messages. Knit 1, Pearl 2, could mean 2 panzer divisions moving east. You become part of this network of whispers. Your task might be simple: sheltering a downed Allied airman in your attic for a single night. The terrifying intimacy of sharing your bread with a stranger whose life is in your hands. Or perhaps you are a courier, carrying a message folded into a tiny square, its contents unknown to you, feeling its weight in your shoe with every step you take. Historians still debate whether the Resistance's greatest contribution was its military impact through sabotage, or its psychological victory in keeping the flame of hope alive in the darkest of times. For you, living in the shadows, it's not an academic question. It is the simple, profound act of refusing to be erased. You are no longer dodging patrols in the shadows of an occupied city. The whispers are gone, replaced by a different kind of noise. You are home, whether that home is in the terrace streets of Coventry, England, or a clapboard house in Detroit, Michigan. But home is not the sanctuary it once was. The war is here too, not in the form of occupying soldiers, but as a constant, pervasive presence that seeps into every aspect of your daily life. It is in the food you eat, the clothes you wear, and the work you do. This is the home front, a battlefield measured not in miles, but in morale, production, and collective will. The most immediate change is on your dinner plate. You hold a small, flimsy booklet in your hand, filled with tiny stamps. This is your ration book, and it dictates the rhythm of your life. It represents your fair share, a concept designed to ensure equality of sacrifice. The richest family on the block gets the exact same meager weekly allowance of sugar, meat, and butter as you do. This forced austerity creates a strange sense of unity, a shared struggle against deprivation. It also sparks a wave of culinary creativity born of necessity. You learn to make cakes without sugar, using grated carrots or beetroots for sweetness. A famous and widely promoted dish in Britain is the Woolton pie, a pastry filled with whatever vegetables were available, a meal that sounds much grander than it tastes. It's a small, slightly comical symbol of making do, of a nation collectively tightening its belt. The war is also a battle for your mind, and its weapons are posted on every wall, every bus, and every factory notice board. Propaganda posters are the primary tool of psychological mobilization. They are the memes of their day, simple, powerful images designed to convey a complex message in a single glance. Some posters inspire guilt, showing a soldier at the front with the caption, "He's risking his life, are you doing all you can?" Others stoke fear, with sinister, shadowy hands reaching across a map, and the warning, "Careless talk costs lives." But many are about empowerment and belonging. They urge you to dig for victory by turning your flower garden into a vegetable patch, or to contribute to scrap metal drives, making you feel that your old iron railings or aluminum pots are being transformed directly into a Spitfire or a Sherman tank. This sense of direct contribution is most powerful for the millions of women who have entered the workforce, many for the first time. You step onto the factory floor, and the scale of it takes your breath away. The air is thick with the smell of hot metal and welding fumes, a deafening symphony of clanging machinery and the high-pitched scream of rivet guns. You are a silent army, clad in overalls and headscarves, building the very tools of war. You might be wiring the complex instrument panel of a Lancaster bomber, or assembling the shell casings that will be fired on a distant battlefield. This is the world of Rosie the Riveter, a cultural icon representing a seismic shift in society. Historians still debate whether this massive entry of women into the workforce was a revolutionary moment that permanently altered social norms, or a temporary emergency measure that was largely rolled back once the men returned home. In this moment, however, looking down the long assembly line at the rows of determined faces, you feel an undeniable sense of purpose and accomplishment. You are not just earning a wage, you are building victory, one rivet at a time. The deafening symphony of the factory fades into a profound, almost sacred silence. You leave the world of hot metal and rivet guns behind, and you find yourself traveling through the damp, green English countryside. You arrive not at a military base or a fortified bunker, but at a sprawling, slightly eccentric Victorian mansion called Bletchley Park. It looks more like a place for a weekend retreat or a game of croquet on the lawn. But behind these red brick walls, another silent army is fighting the most intellectually demanding battle of the entire war. You are not a soldier or a factory worker. You are a linguist, a mathematician, or perhaps just exceptionally good at crossword puzzles, and your weapon is your mind. The enemy you face is a machine. Its name is Enigma. To an outsider, it looks like a complex typewriter in a wooden box. But inside, a series of rotating wheels and a plugboard creates a system of encryption so complex that the number of possible settings is greater than the number of atoms in the known universe. Every day, the German military, especially the U-boat wolf packs hunting Allied convoys in the Atlantic, uses these machines to send their orders, their position reports, their most vital secrets, believing them to be perfectly secure. Your job is to break the unbreakable, to find the ghost in this machine. The atmosphere inside the hastily constructed wooden huts on the mansion's grounds is one of intense, focused pressure. It's less James Bond and more university library during finals week, only with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. The air is thick with the smell of stale tea, cigarette smoke, and the quiet desperation of thousands of minds pushing against a seemingly impenetrable wall. The people here are a strange and brilliant collection of misfits, a testament to the idea that victory requires more than just brute force. A fascinating and now famous curiosity is how some of them were recruited. The Secret Intelligence Service placed a fiendishly difficult crossword puzzle in the Daily Telegraph newspaper, and then invited those who managed to solve it within a specific time limit to an interview. They were looking for a very particular kind of mind, one that could see patterns where others saw only chaos. The work is a relentless grind. Day after day, you are trying to find a key, a single, tiny mistake, a lazy radio operator who uses a predictable setting, a short, repeated phrase that can provide a toehold. The breakthroughs, when they come, are not moments of loud celebration, but of quiet, breathless relief. Much of this work is aided by a colossal, clattering electromechanical device known as the bomb, designed by the visionary Alan Turing, which mechanizes the process of checking thousands of possible rotor settings. When you succeed, when you break the code for a given day, the result is a flood of intelligence, so pure and vital, it is given the highest classification, Ultra. You suddenly know whether U-boats are planning to hunt, what a German general is planning for his next attack. This information is a lifeline, allowing the Royal Navy to route convoys around the waiting wolf packs, saving countless lives and millions of tons of vital supplies. Historians still debate precisely how much the intelligence from Bletchley Park shortened the war, with estimates ranging from 2 to 4 years. But for you, The greatest burden is the secret itself. You know of victories that can never be celebrated, of losses that had to be allowed to happen so that the enemy would never suspect their codes were broken. You carry this weight in silence, a quiet hero in a shadow war. The damp intellectual quiet of Bletchley Park dissolves, and you find yourself in an environment that is its complete opposite. The air is no longer cool and still, but scorching hot and filled with a fine, gritty dust that gets into your eyes, your mouth, and every fold of your clothing. You are in the vast, unforgiving emptiness of the North African desert. The landscape is a stark, mesmerizing canvas of endless sand dunes and sun-baked rock, a place where the horizon shimmers and plays tricks on your mind. The sky is a huge, indifferent bowl of pale blue. This is a war of mechanics and movement, a theater so different from the close-quarters fighting in Europe, or the naval battles of the Pacific, that it feels like it's being fought on another planet. Here, the tank is king. Battles are not fought over cities or for strategic hills, but for patches of desolate ground that offer a tactical advantage, for control of a vital crossroads, or a single, precious well. The fighting is like a naval battle on land, with columns of tanks maneuvering across the open desert like fleets of ships, firing at each other from great distances. The psychological dimension of this war is unique. There is a strange mixture of extreme danger and profound boredom. Days can be spent on high alert, baking inside a steel tank that becomes a furnace under the midday sun, followed by nights so cold that frost can form on your blanket. The featureless landscape can be disorienting, and the constant threat of mines, both your own and the enemy's, makes every inch of ground feel treacherous. Presiding over this desert chessboard are two commanders who become legends in their own time. On one side, you have the German general Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. He is a master of surprise, of bluff, and of rapid, daring maneuvers that consistently leave his opponents off balance. He cultivates a myth of invincibility, both among his own troops and his enemies. On the other side, after a series of British commanders have failed to stop Rommel, comes General Bernard Montgomery. He is the opposite of the flamboyant Rommel. He is cautious, meticulous, and supremely self-confident. A man who will not fight until he is absolutely certain that every detail is in place and the odds are overwhelmingly in his favor. The psychological warfare between the two sides is constant. Rommel, often outnumbered, became famous for creating phantom tank divisions. He would mount wooden frames and canvas onto jeeps and trucks, making them look like tanks from a distance, and then drive them around in the rear to create huge dust clouds, tricking British reconnaissance pilots into believing his forces were much larger than they actually were. This eccentric but effective tactic played on the fears and uncertainties of his opponents. The turning point comes in late 1942 at a sleepy railway stop called El Alamein. Montgomery, now commanding the British 8th Army, has amassed a massive superiority in men, tanks, and artillery. He doesn't try to outwit Rommel with a clever maneuver. He simply launches a massive, grinding frontal assault, a battle of attrition he knows he can win. Historians still debate whether Montgomery's cautious, methodical approach was a stroke of genius that guaranteed victory, or if a more daring commander could have won the battle sooner and with fewer casualties. For you, huddled in a slit trench as the ground shakes from the greatest artillery barrage since the First World War, it is simply the beginning of the end of the war in the desert. The chess match is reaching its checkmate. The vast, sandy expanse of the desert fades, and you are once again on the water, but this time it's the deep blue of the Mediterranean. The air is warm and carries the scent of olive groves and citrus trees. After the decisive victory in North Africa, the next logical step for the Allies is to cross this sea and strike at what Winston Churchill famously called the soft underbelly of Europe, Italy. The plan seems sound. Knocking Italy out of the war would open up the Mediterranean to Allied shipping, force Germany to divert troops from the Russian front, and provide a stepping stone into the heart of the Axis Empire. The initial invasion of Sicily in July 1943 is a resounding success, and soon after, the the Italian government surrenders. You might be forgiven for thinking this part of the war will be a swift, triumphant march up the Italian peninsula. But the reality is brutally different. The soft underbelly turns out to be a spine of solid rock. As soon as the Italians surrender, German forces pour into the country, disarming their former allies and digging in for a long and bitter fight. The geography of Italy is a defender's dream. It is a long, narrow country dominated by the Apennine Mountains, a rugged chain of peaks and steep valleys that runs down its center like a backbone. This terrain makes the sweeping tank maneuvers of the desert or the plains of France impossible. The war in Italy becomes a slow, agonizing crawl, a series of bloody frontal assaults against heavily fortified German defensive lines that stretch from one coast to the other. You are now an infantryman, a dogface, and your world has shrunk to the size of the next hill, the next river crossing, the next fortified town perched on a seemingly unclimbable ridge. The fighting is intimate and vicious. Every inch of ground is paid for in blood. The weather adds to the misery. The sunny, romantic image of Italy is replaced by a reality of freezing rain, thick mud that sucks at your boots, and snow in the high mountain passes. The psychological toll of this slow, grinding advance is immense. Morale is a constant struggle. Victories are measured in yards, not miles, and the end of the war feels impossibly distant. An obscure but telling phrase used by the soldiers here was the DI Dodgers, a deeply sarcastic term for themselves, a response to a misguided comment by a British politician suggesting they were having an easy time in Italy while the real fight was being prepared for in France. It's a bitter joke that perfectly captures their feeling of being forgotten in a secondary, albeit brutal, theater of the war. One of the most formidable obstacles you face is the Gustav Line, a chain of fortifications anchored on the ancient monastery of Monte Cassino, which sits atop a massive hill overlooking the main route to Rome. For months, the Allies battered themselves against this position, suffering horrific casualties. The decision to bomb the historic monastery, a priceless cultural treasure, remains one of the most controversial of the entire war. Historians still debate whether the bombing was a tragic military necessity, based on the belief that the Germans were using it as an observation post, or a catastrophic error that ultimately caused more harm than good, as German paratroopers then moved into the ruins and turned them into an even stronger fortress. For you on the ground, struggling through the mud and carnage below, the debate is academic. The mountain remains, a symbol of a campaign that is anything but soft. You leave the mud and mountains of Italy behind. The slow, grinding crawl is over. Now, you are part of something enormous, a force of unimaginable scale, poised for a single, decisive leap. You are on a ship, one of thousands that choke the harbors of southern England, a vast, grey armada that stretches as far as the eye can see. The date is June 6, 1944. 4 months, the tension has been building, an almost unbearable weight of anticipation. You've trained for this moment, rehearsed it until the movements are second nature, but nothing can truly prepare you for the reality. This is D-Day, the longest day. The sea is rough, a churning grey expanse under a sky the color of slate. The ship pitches and rolls, and the air is thick with the smell of diesel fumes and nervous sweat. Around you are the faces of your comrades, young men from all corners of the Allied world, their faces a mixture of bravado, grim determination, and barely concealed fear. The psychological preparation for this moment has been intense. You've been briefed on your objectives, shown maps and models of the beaches, but the sheer scale of the operation is hard to comprehend. It is the largest amphibious invasion in history, a colossal roll of the dice. You clutch your rifle, the cold metal a familiar and slightly reassuring weight in your hands. As your landing craft approaches the coast of Normandy, the world erupts into a cacophony of terrifying noise. The thunderous roar of the naval bombardment from the battleships behind you, the scream of rockets, the drone of planes overhead, and the angry percussive chatter of German machine guns from the shore. The ramp of the landing craft drops with a sickening clang, and you are plunged from the relative safety of the boat into a cold, chaotic hell. The water is a maelstrom of explosions. The air is filled with the zip and crack of bullets. You run, hunched over, through the surf, the weight of your gear trying to drag you down. Your only thought to cross the open expanse of sand to the relative cover of the seawall. The scene on the beach, particularly on the sector codenamed Omaha, is one of pure, unadulterated carnage. The pre-invasion bombardment has been tragically ineffective, and the German defenses are almost untouched. The psychological shock for the first waves of men is overwhelming. They are pinned down, leaderless, their carefully rehearsed plans dissolving in the face of a murderous crossfire. It is here that individual courage and small unit initiative make the difference between victory and catastrophic defeat. A single officer rallies a group of terrified men and finds a gap in the barbed wire. A lone soldier manages to take out a machine gun nest that has been holding up the entire advance. Historians still debate whether the success of the DI landings was a result of meticulous Allied planning and overwhelming force, or if it was ultimately secured by the incredible bravery and improvisation of individual soldiers in those first critical hours. An eccentric but crucial piece of equipment for many soldiers was a simple child's toy, a small metal cricket clicker. A single click was to be answered by 2 clicks, a low-tech but effective way for paratroopers scattered in the dark behind enemy lines to identify each other as friendly. For you on the beach, there are no clever tricks, just the primal instinct to survive and to move forward, one agonizing yard at a time, into the fire. The grey, blood-stained beaches of Normandy recede, and once more, you find yourself under a sweltering sun, half a world away. The air is no longer damp and cool, but thick, humid, and buzzing with insects. You are in the Pacific, but this is not the open ocean of the carrier battles. This is a dense, suffocating jungle on a volcanic island whose name you can barely pronounce. Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. They are not grand strategic objectives like cities or industrial centers. They are tiny, miserable specks of land, but they are necessary stepping stones on the long, brutal path to Japan. This is the island-hopping campaign, a form of warfare that feels primal and uniquely terrifying. The enemy you face here is unlike any you have encountered before. The Japanese soldier is a formidable and fanatical opponent, deeply indoctrinated with the Bushido code, a warrior ethic that values death in battle over surrender or dishonor. They do not fight to win in the conventional sense. They fight to the last man, to inflict the maximum number of casualties before they die. The psychological impact of facing such an enemy is profound. You learn that there is no such thing as a safe area. A position you thought you had secured can suddenly erupt in a banzai charge in the middle of the night. A terrifying, suicidal wave of screaming soldiers. The landscape itself is an enemy. The jungle is a tangled, claustrophobic maze of vines and razor-sharp kunai grass. The volcanic islands are a hellscape of black sand, sharp rock, and a complex network of caves, pillboxes, and underground tunnels that the Japanese have spent months, sometimes years, constructing. You are not fighting on the surface of the island. You are fighting through it, one fortified position at a time. The tools of this war are flamethrowers and explosives, the only weapons effective at clearing out the deep, interconnected bunkers. The fighting is close, personal, and unimaginably savage. An obscure but vital element of this campaign was the contribution of the Navajo code talkers. They were a group of Native American Marines who used their unique, unwritten language to transmit coded messages over the radio. The Japanese, who were brilliant codebreakers, were never able to decipher it. The language's complex syntax and tonal qualities, combined with a special vocabulary the code talkers created for military terms, made it the only truly unbreakable code of the war. Beshlo, the Navajo word for ironfish, meant submarine. Nihima, or our mother, meant America. This secret linguistic weapon saved countless lives by allowing for secure real-time communication in the heat of battle. But for you, the infantryman. The world is a series of terrifying life-or-death struggles. Historians still debate the strategic necessity of invading some of these heavily fortified islands, questioning whether they could have been bypassed and left to wither on the vine. But as you lie in a shallow foxhole, the ground shaking from artillery and the jungle alive with unseen threats, you are not thinking about grand strategy. You are simply trying to survive until the sun rises, knowing that the next day will be just as hellish as the last. The psychological trauma of this kind of warfare, the constant, unrelenting stress and savagery, will leave a deep and lasting scar on a generation of men. The suffocating heat of the jungle gives way to a different kind of oppression, a cold that has nothing to do with the weather. You are in the heart of Europe now, in a place where the familiar rules of war no longer apply. This is not a battlefield between soldiers. It is something else entirely. Something meticulously planned and executed with the cold logic of an industrial process. You are now a witness to the unthinkable, trying to comprehend a crime so vast it defies the limits of language. You stand before a railway line that ends abruptly in front of a gate that bears an infamous, cynical promise in wrought iron. Arbeit matched frei. Work sets you free. This is Auschwitz, and places like it, the final destination for millions. The fundamental psychological question that hangs over this place like a permanent, low-lying fog is not just what happened, but how. How could ordinary people, men who had families, who listened to classical music, who enjoyed a walk in the park, become the architects and administrators of mass murder? The answer is as chilling as it is complex. It lies in the power of ideology to dehumanize, to turn neighbors into pests, to reduce human beings to numbers in a ledger. It's a process of psychological distancing, where murder becomes a bureaucratic task, a problem of timetables, transportation logistics, and resource allocation. The perpetrators were not all raving monsters. Many were simple bureaucrats, clerks, and engineers, cogs in a vast machine, each performing their small, specific function, often without having to look their victims in the eye. Historians still debate the very origins of this machine, questioning whether the final solution was a clear intention from the very beginning, or if it grew out of a chaotic radicalization of policy as the war progressed. You try to imagine the sensory reality, the jarring arrival in packed cattle cars after days in darkness, the confusion and the shouting, the methodical separation on the ramp, a single flick of a finger by a man in a clean uniform deciding life or death, the loss of everything that makes you an individual. Your name is replaced by a number tattooed on your arm. Your clothes are taken, your head is shaved. You are made anonymous, a ghost in a striped uniform, living in a world of endless fences, identical wooden barracks, and the pervasive, sickeningly sweet smell of the crematoria. Hunger is a constant, gnawing presence, and the cold of the Polish winter is a physical torture. Yet, even in this absolute darkness, the human spirit refused to be completely extinguished. There were countless acts of quiet, desperate resilience, of people fighting to retain their humanity. In the Theresienstadt ghetto, a supposed model camp used for propaganda purposes, the prisoners formed a secret cultural life. They gave lectures, wrote poetry, and even formed an orchestra. Imagine it. In a place designed to crush the soul, a group of starving musicians managed to get hold of instruments and perform complex symphonies. This was not mere entertainment. It was an act of profound defiance, a declaration that even in the face of annihilation, beauty and dignity would not be surrendered. It was a way of saying, we are still here, we are still human. It is a small, obscure, and heartbreakingly beautiful light in the deepest darkness imaginable. The cold darkness of the camps recedes, replaced by a different kind of cold, a biting, physical chill that seeps through the layers of your uniform. You are in the Ardennes forest, a dense, hilly region on the border of Belgium and Germany. It's December 1944. The trees are heavy with snow, their branches forming a white canopy that muffles all sound, creating an eerie, almost cathedral-like silence. The war, you believe, is in its final stages. You have pushed the German army all the way from the beaches of Normandy to their own border. The feeling among you and your fellow soldiers is one of weary optimism. It's just a matter of time now. The talk is of being home by Christmas. This sector of the front is considered a quiet one, a place for new, untested American divisions to get their first taste of the line, and for weary veterans to rest and refit. This sense of security is a dangerous illusion, because in this very same forest, the one the Allies deemed impassable back in 1940, before the Germans simply drove right through it, a desperate gamble is about to unfold. Hitler, refusing to accept defeat, has scraped together the last of his reserves, his final panzer divisions, for one last massive offensive in the West. His plan is audacious to the point of madness: to punch through the weak American lines in the Ardennes race to the sea, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and split the Allied armies in two, forcing them to sue for peace. It is a plan born of pure desperation, a final, convulsive roar from a dying beast. The attack begins in the pre-dawn darkness of December 16th, with a colossal artillery barrage that shatters the frozen silence. The psychological shock is absolute. Out of the fog and the swirling snow, a grey tide of German tanks and infantry emerges, catching the American defenders completely by surprise. The initial hours are a scene of chaos and collapse. Units are overrun, communications are cut, and a wave of panic ripples through the front lines. To add to the confusion, the Germans have launched a bizarre and sinister special operation. A small number of English-speaking German commandos, led by the notorious Otto Scazzini, have been dressed in American uniforms and equipped with American jeeps. Their mission is to infiltrate your lines, spreading misinformation, changing road signs, and creating maximum paranoia. Suddenly, you can't be sure if the soldier at the next checkpoint is a friend or an enemy. Amidst the chaos, pockets of resistance form. At the vital crossroads town of Bastogne, the 101st Airborne Division is rushed in and quickly finds itself completely surrounded, cut off, and besieged by a vastly superior German force. They are low on ammunition, food, and medical supplies, hammered by artillery in the freezing cold. The German commander sends a message demanding their honorable surrender. The acting American commander, General Anthony McAuliffe, sends back one of the most famous replies in military history: a single word: nuts. It is an act of pure, unadulterated defiance that becomes a rallying cry for the entire Allied effort. Historians still debate whether the Ardennes offensive was a brilliant strategic gamble that was only thwarted by bad weather and stubborn resistance, or if it was a foolish and wasteful expenditure of Germany's last reserves that ultimately hastened the end of the war. For you, huddled in a foxhole in the frozen ground around Bastogne, it is simply a desperate fight for survival, a brutal and unexpected reminder that the war is far from over. The snows of the Ardennes melt away, and the frozen mud of the forest floor is replaced by the dry, sun-baked earth of the American Southwest. You find yourself in a place that does not officially exist. It is a secret city, perched on a high desert mesa in New Mexico, surrounded by the stark, stunning beauty of canyons and mountains. The air is thin and clear, and the silence of the landscape is profound. This is Los Alamos. From the outside, it is a fortress, surrounded by barbed wire and patrolled by military police. But inside, it's a strange hybrid of a university campus and a suburban town, with simple, prefabricated houses, muddy streets, and children riding their bicycles. You are a physicist here, one of a collection of the most brilliant scientific minds ever assembled in one place. You are here because of a letter written a few years ago by Albert Einstein to the president, warning that the scientific breakthroughs in nuclear fission could lead to the creation of a bomb of unimaginable power. And the fear, the constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that powers this entire enterprise, is that Nazi Germany is already working on such a weapon. So you are in a race against a shadowy, unseen enemy, a race against time. a race to unlock the most fundamental and destructive secrets of the universe before they do. This is the Manhattan Project. At the center of this intellectual storm is a man named J. Robert Oppenheimer, a charismatic, complex, and deeply thoughtful physicist who has been given the monumental task of directing your efforts. The work is exhilarating, a pure, intellectual thrill. You are surrounded by Nobel laureates, by men and women who speak the rarefied language of quantum mechanics as easily as you speak of the weather. The days are a blur of frantic work on chalkboards filled with complex equations, of impassioned debates that last late into the night. It is a collaboration of genius on an industrial scale. The atmosphere of intense focus is occasionally broken by the eccentricities of the people here. One of the younger, more brilliant minds here, a physicist named Richard Feynman, has a peculiar hobby. He enjoys picking the locks on the filing cabinets that hold the project's most sensitive secrets, not to steal them, but simply to prove to the military security officers how absurd their conventional measures are against a truly determined mind. But as the theoretical work nears completion, as the equations on the chalkboard begin to translate into blueprints for actual hardware, a different feeling begins to creep into the rarefied air of the mesa. It is the cold, heavy weight of what you are actually building. The intellectual pursuit, once so pure, is now chained to a terrifyingly practical application. It is a Faustian bargain, a trade of knowledge for power, of scientific curiosity for a weapon that could incinerate entire cities. When news arrives in May of 1945 that Germany has surrendered, the original justification for your work evaporates. The race has been won, but the machine you have built keeps moving forward. Historians still debate whether the primary motivation for continuing the project, after Germany's defeat, was to use the bomb against Japan to save American lives in a potential invasion, or if it was intended as a powerful demonstration of force to the Soviet Union to shape the post-war world. For you, the creator, the question is more personal. The theoretical work is done. The calculations have been checked and rechecked. Now, all that is left is to see if the monster you have so carefully designed on paper will actually come to life. The dry, intellectual heat of the New Mexico desert is blown away by the damp, metallic wind of a dying empire. You are back in Europe, and the air is thick with the smell of smoke and decay. It is the spring of 1945. The war on this continent is in its death throes. A final, violent spasm. You are a Soviet soldier, part of the colossal Red Army that has fought its way from the ruins of Stalingrad, across thousands of miles of blood-soaked earth, all the way to the very heart of the Third Reich. Your objective is the city ahead of you, a sprawling skeletal ruin silhouetted against a sky permanently stained orange by fires. This is Berlin. The battle for the city is not a strategic maneuver. It is an act of pure, cathartic vengeance. For 4 years, your homeland has been ravaged, your cities destroyed, your people subjected to unimaginable brutality. Now, you have reached the lair of the beast, and your only mission is to tear it down, stone by stone. The fighting is savage, a repeat of Stalingrad, but on an even grander scale. The German defense is a motley collection of what's left. Hardened SS fanatics, old men from the Home Guard, and even children from the Hitler Youth, boys as young as 12 armed with anti-tank rockets they can barely carry. It is a desperate, futile last stand. Meanwhile, 50 feet below the burning city, in a damp, concrete labyrinth of rooms, the world of the man who started it all has shrunk to the size of a bunker. This is the Vorbunker, a subterranean tomb where Adolf Hitler is spending his final days. The psychological atmosphere is one of surreal detachment from the reality raging just above. Maps of armies that no longer exist are moved around on tables. Grand, delusional counteroffensives are planned and ordered to phantom divisions. Hitler, physically and mentally a wreck, ravaged by a cocktail of medications and the stress of his collapsing empire, oscillates between fits of incandescent rage and deep, paralytic depression. He blames his generals, he blames the German people, He blames everyone but himself for the catastrophe he has unleashed upon the world. In these final twilight days, you see the true nature of the regime laid bare. An obscure but telling event is Hitler's last public appearance. It is not to address the nation or rally his troops, but to award medals to a group of teenage Hitler Youth soldiers who have been defending the city. The black and white newsreel footage is profoundly disturbing, showing a stooped, trembling old man patting the cheeks of children he is about to send to their deaths. It is the image of a leader consuming his own people to the very end. On April 30th, 1945, with the sound of Soviet artillery shaking the very ground above him, Hitler commits suicide. A few days later, the German garrison in Berlin surrenders. Historians still debate the exact sequence of events in those final, chaotic hours in the bunker, a scene of bizarre loyalty tests, last-minute marriages, and GDR-Mering-style suicides. For you, the Soviet soldier emerging from the rubble of the Reichstag building into the pale spring sunlight, the debate is irrelevant. The war in Europe is finally, blessedly, over. The eagle's nest has fallen, and all that is left is a smoking ruin and an eerie, profound silence. The eerie silence of the fallen eagle's nest in Berlin is now a memory. You have traveled across the world again, to the final, violent theater of the war. While Europe begins the slow, painful process of digging itself out from the rubble, the war in the Pacific rages on with a ferocity that is almost unimaginable. The island-hopping campaign has shown that the Japanese will defend every inch of their territory to the last man. The projected casualty figures for an invasion of the Japanese mainland are apocalyptic, with estimates running into the millions for both sides. And so, a different kind of son is being prepared, the one born in the secret city in the desert. You find yourself on a tiny island in the Pacific called Tinian. It's hot, humid, and home to the largest airfield in the world. And on this August morning, you are climbing into the polished silver fuselage of a B-29 superfortress. But this is no ordinary bombing mission. There are no vast armadas of hundreds of planes. There is just you, in this single aircraft, the Enola Gay, carrying a single bomb in its belly. The bomb has a deceptively simple, almost playful name, Little Boy. The mood inside the aircraft is not one of excitement, but of intense, focused, clinical professionalism. Every switch is checked, every gauge is monitored. You are delivering a package that contains the heart of a star. As you fly towards Japan, the sky is a perfect, cloudless blue. Down below, the city of Hiroshima is just waking up, a beautiful, vibrant city nestled on a river delta, completely untouched, until now, by the war. An air raid siren sounds briefly, but is quickly turned off. For weeks, the Americans have been running a strange and little-known psychological campaign. They have been dropping single non-nuclear bombs, nicknamed pumpkin bombs because of their shape and color, on various Japanese cities. The goal was to get the population accustomed to the sight of a lone B-29 flying overhead, to make them complacent, to ensure that on this day, no one would bother to take cover. The plan works perfectly. At 8:15 in the morning, the bomb bay doors open. The bomb drops away, and the plane, suddenly thousands of pounds lighter, lurches upwards. You immediately begin a steep, diving turn, a maneuver you have practiced relentlessly. You put on a pair of thick, dark welding goggles. Then, it happens. A flash of light, silent, and so brilliant it feels like the universe has been torn open. It is a second sun, a sun that is not in the sky, but on the earth. Even with the goggles, the light is blinding. A few moments later, the first shockwave hits the plane, a solid, violent jolt, like a giant hand has slapped the aircraft out of the sky. Then, a second, reflected wave, bounces up from the ground. You look back. Where the city of Hiroshima once was, there is now a column of roiling, purple, grey, and orange fire. A cloud that is climbing into the stratosphere, boiling and churning, forming that terrible, iconic mushroom shape. The city is gone, erased. 3 days later, a second bomb, Fat Man, is dropped on the city of Nagasaki. The sun has risen twice. Historians still debate with fierce passion whether the atomic bombs were a military necessity to avoid a bloody invasion of Japan that would have cost millions of lives, or if Japan was already on the verge of surrender and the bombs were used primarily as a political statement to the Soviet Union. For humanity, the debate is almost secondary. The world has now changed in a way that is fundamental and irreversible. You have seen it with your own eyes. Humanity now possesses the power of its own annihilation. The nuclear age has begun. The terrible, brilliant light of the second sun fades, and what is left is a profound, ringing silence. The war is over. The news arrives not with a single, dramatic bang, but in a wave of exhausted relief that washes over the entire planet. You see the images, the black and white newsreels of sailors kissing strangers in Times Square, of crowds dancing in the fountains of Trafalgar Square, a global explosion of pure, unadulterated joy. The tiger that walked into the dinner party 6 long years ago has finally been slain. But now, as the confetti settles and the cheering subsides, you are left to survey the room, and you see that it is a wreck. The table is overturned, the china is shattered, and the walls are scarred by its claws. The world is a landscape of ghosts and ruins. Cities from Warsaw to Manila are little more than fields of rubble. Entire generations have been lost. The map of the world has been redrawn, and new lines are already being etched in the sand. Lines that will define a new kind of conflict, a cold war between the very allies who fought together to achieve this victory. The immediate, overwhelming task is not just to rebuild, but to understand. To ask the question that has been burning in the background through all the battles and all the suffering. How did this happen? And how can you stop it from ever happening again? This quest for understanding leads you to a courtroom in a German city. A city that was once the symbolic heart of the Nazi Party, Nuremberg. Here, for the first time in history, the leaders of a defeated nation are put on trial, not just for waging war, but for crimes against humanity. You sit in the gallery and you watch them. The men whose names once inspired terror and commanded armies, now sitting in a wooden dock, looking small and grey and ordinary, listening through headphones to a simultaneous translation of the charges against them. It is a slow, methodical, and deeply necessary process, an attempt to impose the logic of law onto the madness of war and genocide. But even as justice is being served here, a darker, more obscure process is unfolding in the shadows. Clandestine escape networks, known as Ratlins, are being used by many high-ranking Nazis to flee Europe, finding refuge in South America or the Middle East. A reminder that the tendrils of this evil are long and difficult to sever completely. The Nuremberg trials represent a monumental effort to create a new standard of international accountability. Yet, historians still debate their true legacy. Were they a genuine leap forward for human rights and the rule of law, establishing that just following orders is not a defense for monstrous acts? Or were they a form of victor's justice, a process where the winners of a war impose their own legal framework upon the losers? As you look down at the defendants, you realize that the answer is likely somewhere in between. The world that emerges from the silence is a wounded one, a world that has lost its innocence forever. It is a world that now understands the fragility of peace, the depths of human cruelty, and the incredible, enduring resilience of the human spirit. The echoes of these 6 years will reverberate for generations, a permanent scar on the memory of the world, a constant, solemn whisper in the long, quiet aftermath. And so, our long journey through the storm comes to a quiet end. The echoes of the past, the roar of engines, and the thunder of guns, now begin to fade, replaced by the gentle stillness of your own quiet room. You can feel the weight of history settling, not as a burden, but as a story that has now been told. Its lessons learned, its ghosts laid to rest for the night. The immense, sprawling map of the world, with its shifting fronts and vast oceans, shrinks back down to the safe and comfortable dimensions of your own space. You are here, now, far from the cold mud of the mountains and the burning sands of the desert. You are secure, wrapped in the soft, reassuring weight of your blanket, a silent fortress against the troubles of the world. Allow your mind to drift away from the stark, black and white images of the past and into the gentle, full color of your own quiet thoughts. The air you breathe is calm and still, each breath a slow rhythmic tide that pulls you deeper into a state of serene relaxation, washing away any lingering tension.